How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the channel, albeit a slightly fluey Rads today, so apologies in advance if I talk a bit slowly and a bit more laid back. But I'm not going to be put off by a sore throat or cold because I'm brave. It's also because I actually want to try and maintain consistency on this channel for once, which I don't think has ever actually been the case. Doesn't feel like it anyway. Last week I spoke about the championship promotion race and that went down pretty well. So today I thought I'd do the obvious thing and talk about the relegation battle, even though it arguably is not quite as interesting because it's a little bit more obvious who's actually going to go down. There's not as many teams to talk about. However, I still think it's, you still can't say it's going to be that straightforward because there are a few teams that have games against each other, or teams that are picking up form and teams that are looking especially bad, i.e. Peterborough. You never know. You never know. So please, by all means, let me know in the comments below your thoughts on what you think is going to happen at the bottom end of the championship. And it's funny because last year I did this video and Forest were in it. And this year we're in the promotion version. So yeah, times have changed a lot in that sense, which is great. This is the current championship table at the bottom end. I'm only going to include Reading, and this is why it's arguably not quite as interesting because there's only one team outside the relegation zone that I think is in with a shot of relegation. I will mention the likes of Hull and Cardiff and Birmingham and Bristol, I suppose. I'm not going to talk about them in depth though because I feel all those teams are safe, but they are the teams that are obviously above the bottom four. And even Reading have got a bit of a cushion, haven't they? I mean, probably not the kind of cushion they wanted. It's one of those cheap cushions from Aldi, but that's no disrespect to Aldi. I'm sure they do good cushions. I never tried it. They do still have quite a nice gap on 21st and 22nd, that being Wayne Rooney's Derby County. So the only game that Reading have to play against those four teams that I've just mentioned, obviously not including them, is Barnsley away on the 2nd of April. The teams that they've already played around them, they've managed to get a total of 8 points of a possible 15, and that being not the worst record. It's not the best record out of this bottom four selection, but it's definitely not the worst. You'll see who that is. And as I mentioned, the teams above Reading I feel are safe, but I'm going to call this category safe but beatable. Reading still have to play both Hull and Swansea City. However, you also got to take into account, especially being a relegation candidate, the teams you've got to play at the top end. Now, for the promotion version, you only paid attention to the teams that got to play around each other, and the rest were just teams in the bottom half of the table. And Reading still have to play Forest, obviously this weekend, Bournemouth, Blackburn, Sheffield and Luton. All of those, apart from Forest, in the top six. And obviously, we are on the absolute cusp of the top six. And I'm looking forward to the game, of course, at the weekend. I sincerely hope Forest don't make hard work of it because, I mean, we shouldn't have drawn the first game against Reading because we bombarded them in the second half, quite frankly. Yeah, please win. Please win quite comfortably. Now, of course, Reading got rid of Paunovic. Probably a bit too late, to be honest. A lot of Reading fans were calling for him to go months ago, to be quite honest. But ultimately, they pulled the trigger when they won a game against Preston. But it was obviously decided beforehand. But it's just a bit ironic that Preston were the team that they ended up beating just before they sacked their manager and then temporarily got in Paul Ince, which is a really interesting appointment. Obviously only temporary, but still they're looking to him to be the man to keep them up, and I'm not entirely sure if that's the right decision or not. The things that are not going to go in their direction though, especially when you look at the teams that they've got left to play, conceded the second most goals in the division with 68 goals conceded, and they've still got 11 games left to play. There is one thing that I think does go in Reading's favour, that being the return of Lucas João. Now obviously Reading were really quite a different team last season. They ended it quite poorly, but ultimately they were a playoff level side. This season they're significantly not that, and Lucas João ended last season quite quietly. But you've noticed as soon as he come back this season after being off for 5 months with a hip injury, he's already got 6 goals in 11 matches. Reading arguably should be surviving because you look at the teams below them, they're better than Barnsley and Peterborough, and Derby's probably quite 50-50, but you never know. On to Wayne Rooney's Derby County. So I've done it again. On to Derby County. Apologies. I get the names mixed up. Now, it's weird with Derby. Unlike with Reading, they've got to play Barnsley. Derby don't have to play any of the teams around them the rest of the season. They've actually got one less game to play than all the other teams around them as well. But the winnable category is Swansea, Bristol and Cardiff, 2 of those being home matches. So that's probably got to be going in their favour, hasn't it? And worth pointing out, Cardiff obviously are significantly improving. Funnily enough, since they beat Forest in January, they've got significantly better. But that Cardiff game at home for Derby is on the last game of the season. And if Cardiff do drop off and they still find themselves being like 16th to 20th, that could be a gigantic game for Derby. Hopefully they lose it. The top side they've still got left to play: Bournemouth, Blackburn, Fulham and QPR as well. Now, it isn't all hope that's lost there, because they did beat Bournemouth the first game. They lost to Blackburn. They drew with Fulham away, and obviously they nearly beat QPR if it wasn't for that great goal from Andre Gray a few months ago, which was quite enjoyable from my point of view. Now, even though Derby have no games against relegation rivals, it's worth pointing out they actually have the best record against the teams around them. So based off that, they probably are the better team of these 4, because they've got the best record against each other. 10 points taken from a possible 18. It is also worth pointing out, obviously, that Derby have had minus 21 points took off them. And, you know, the last time I went to Derby, it was a bit chilly, but it wasn't minus 21 degrees. So yeah, it's a bit funny that. But the point does still stand though. If Derby were not under a transfer ban or a points deduction, they would currently be 16th in the Championship. So it's not like they'd be right up there or anything. I mean, I've seen at times they've been higher than that if it wasn't for their points deduction. So on to Barnsley. Again, 11 games left to play. They still have to play Reading, as I mentioned, and also Peterborough. And it is really, really weird with Barnsley, because I watched them play obviously in January and I thought they were absolutely dreadful. They were one of the worst sides to come to Forest, without a shadow of a doubt. They looked hopeless. They lacked creativity, they lacked ideas significantly, and Forest weren't even at their best and we still won 3-0. And you look at the second half, if you watch that entire game, you'll see Barnsley had a lot of the ball in that second half, and I wasn't even scared about them scoring, because whenever they had the ball, they did very little with it. It's been mainly down our own end, but yeah, this just shows how poor Barnsley they are. They haven't actually really done much to threaten us. Like, they've had so many just half shots that weren't even dangerous at all. I mean, they're on the break here. That's all they really do, is they just get the ball near the goal, but they don't actually really threaten it. I was looking at that and thinking Barnsley are certain to get relegated, but saying it took their manager, I'm not going to try and say his name because I'll butcher it, the Iranian lad, it took them 13 games to get a win with him in charge, and then suddenly he gets 3 in quick succession. So fair play, they are slowly but surely starting to get there. Don't know why, but we're slowly starting to see signs that Barnsley aren't quite as terrible as they were just about a month ago. And it's not like they've beaten just any old side. They've beaten QPR and Middlesbrough, as well as Hull, who are quite 50-50 at the moment, obviously. But beating QPR and Borough, playoff candidates, is something you cannot just bat off and say it's luck, because that's clearly a sign that they're not giving up here. However, they've scored the joint least goals in the division, this being 25, along with Peterborough. Only won 5 games all season, and they've also conceded 51. However, they have 2 games against their relegation rivals. They're picking up form, and they only have to play Fulham, Sheffield and Huddersfield for the rest of the season. And you compare that to Derby and Reading, it's not much, but they don't have to play as many so-called top sides. So you could arguably say the momentum is with Barnsley here when you look at the relegation battle. However, unlike Derby, they still have to play teams around them. 4 points taken from 12 against the teams around them, so they have a pretty dreadful record. And you look at it, they're worse than Peterborough when it comes to points taken from their relegation rivals. So one more team to talk about, Peterborough United. Now, I mentioned that Barnsley's record was the worst, not by much, because Peterborough, they have had the same amount of games. They have 1 game against relegation rivals left to play, obviously that being against Barnsley, like I just mentioned, but only 5 points taken from 15, so they're both as bad as each other. And that is where Reading and Derby probably do have the upper hand on both of them. And also the safe but winnable category includes Swansea and Bristol City, and the teams against the top sides that they've got left to play, this being the likes of QPR, Borough, Luton, Blackburn and Forest. So you look at that, Peterborough have a lot harder games left to play. I just think Peterborough have a general lack of championship quality, and that's quite a sweeping statement and quite an easy thing to say. And I'm not going to claim to be a expert when it comes to Peterborough United, but from what I have seen of them, and just looking at the results, it's blatantly obvious. And if you're going to sell your star asset, Siriki Dembele, and I said this on my transfer stream and video that I did at deadline day, it's just like literally saying to the EFL relegators, please, just relegate us. Because if you're gonna, I'm sorry, I know they're not the richest club in the world. It's a lot of money that they probably got for Dembele for their standards, but it's just you can't be selling your star asset in January when you're already up against it. For to be losing 4-1 to Hull on Grant McCann's first game against his old side, a Hull side that are very 50-50. It's just not good enough, is it? I mentioned there Grant McCann obviously being their manager. I think it was definitely the right call for Ferguson to be, well, he resigned, of course. He probably realised he wasn't the right man. I think Grant McCann is a good manager. I think he's quite an underrated manager as well. It's harsh that Hull got rid of him, but it probably was down to their takeover that they wanted to have a fresh start. And I do still think it was harsh. I think Grant McCann probably long term is a good option because obviously he got Hull promoted last season, so he could very well get Peterborough promoted next season, obviously. And I do think they could come back up. We're seeing with Wickham, they were the whipping boys last season. I think Peterborough that this year. They're not walking the lead, but they're in the playoffs in League One currently. So you could see Peterborough being in and amongst it next season. However, the stats do not go in their favour. Conceded 70 goals and they've got 11 games left to play. That is unsurprisingly the most in the division. They've lost the most for 23 games and they've also got the worst goal difference, -45, and that's a load of stats. And I don't really like to just string out a load of stats, but you have to take note of them as well. That is pretty diabolical, isn't it? From these 4 teams, I don't think any other side is going to get dragged into this. You probably would have your money on Reading surviving, but I just think overall Reading had the best quality. Derby, it's not like Derby are meant to be top 6. They would only be 16th, wouldn't they, if they were to not have this points deduction. Reading, I don't imagine there would be any higher. And they've had a points deduction as well, 6 points off. But Reading clearly do have at least a bit of ability to be doing better. So I do think Reading arguably should be surviving. However, if I'm going to have my money on anyone pulling this off, I think Barnsley. And I never thought I'd say that even a month ago. But I think Barnsley, the momentum's with them. They've got quite a favourable running as well. So I think Barnsley, they have to be touted as potential favourites for a massive Great Escape here, and it would be amazing if they do that. It really would. That is essentially it for this video. If you have enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Apologies for my slightly nasally voice today, but I had to get this video out because I just hate going too long without uploading videos. Would you like me to do a Premier League version of the relegation battle? Because ultimately these are teams that could be in the Championship next season, and I think there's a lot more room for debate when it comes to the Premier League relegation debate than the Championship one. So let me know if you would like to see that. But until then, I shall see you for Reading at the weekend. Come on, you Reds. Thanks for watching, everyone.